I'll tell you what, today is a good day to be in God's house. It's rainy outside, but it is cold in here. Amen? It's good. I know some of you are freezing. It feels so good not to be dripping in sweat already this morning. And so today we're kind of in week 2 of our little mini-series that we started last week, Almost. And last week we talked about King Saul and 1 Samuel and the dangers of being almost obedient. God had told Samuel to tell Saul, hey, when you're going into battle, you're going to win, but you are to destroy everything. And so King Saul goes in and he wins this battle, and he decides, I'm going to destroy almost everything. And he thought, maybe, you know what, I know a little bit better. I know God told me to do this, but I feel like this is better. And Samuel shows up, the prophet Samuel, and Saul's like, hey, look at me. Look how good I did. I followed the Lord's instructions. And then Samuel's like, if you followed the Lord's instructions, why do I hear cattle and sheep behind you, right? Because Saul thought that almost obedience was obedience, and it's not, because partial obedience is still disobedience. And what made Saul's story so tragic is that it wasn't that he completely rejected God. He just adjusted God's instructions a little bit to align with what Saul thought was best. He was placing himself as a better decision maker, that he knew better than God. And honestly, that's how a lot of people do life. And we don't start off by saying, you know what, I just want to rebel against God, I want to sin against God, I want to reject God. We just start slowly almost obeying Him and almost surrendering, keeping the parts that we like and avoiding the parts that cost us something. Last week, like I said, the danger was almost obedient. And today, the danger that we're going to look at is almost there. In Numbers chapter 32, we read a story that I think highlights very much the danger of almost there. So Numbers chapter 32, and this is what we read. It says, the Reubenites and the Gadites, who had very large herds and flocks, saw the lands of Jazer and Gilead were suitable for livestock. So they came to Moses and Eleazar the priest and to the leaders of the community and said, a bunch of names I cannot pronounce without making a fool of myself. They came to them and said, the land the Lord subdued before the people of Israel are suitable for livestock, and your servants have livestock. If we have found favor in your eyes, they said, let this land be given to your servants as our possession. Do not make us cross the Jordan. Okay, so a little bit of a backstory in case you don't really understanding what's going on here is the Israelites have been freed from Egypt. They've been wandering in the desert, and now they're finally heading towards the promised land, and they get almost to the promised land, and we read that the Reubenites and the Gadites, and also we're going to find out half the tribe of Manasseh are like, you know what, this area, they look around and they see, hey, we have cows, we have livestock, and this area around us looks pretty good to us. It is very suitable for livestock. It's not the promised land. The promised land, we got to cross another river, but it's almost there. It's pretty close, and they look around and say, you know what, this is good enough. These tribes, they're not outright rebelling against God. They've just decided that where they are right now is good enough. They've gone far enough. They're still God's people. They're still near the promised land. But hear me, being near is not the same as being inside. And that is the tragedy of this chapter. After generations of slavery, years in the wilderness, after experiencing God provide miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle, they arrive at the edge of the promise. The promised land is just over there. They get right to the edge, and then they stop short. Not out of fear. They weren't scared to go any further. They didn't stop there because God had failed them in some way. None of that had happened. They stopped because they got comfortable. They looked around and thought, you know what? This is good enough. And spiritually, that is where a lot of people end up. Not openly rebellious, not walking away from God, not completely abandoning church, just comfortable enough to stop pursuing more of God. And there is something incredibly dangerous about comfortable Christianity. My son Maddox is here today. Didn't know he was going to be in here as I told this story about him, but that's what happens when you come to church. You find out that your dad talks about you a lot. But one of Maddox's goals in life is comfort. That kid can relax like no one else. We have so many pictures. We probably have more pictures of him just in full chill mode than anything else. Like that kid, he will work extremely hard to make sure that his spot is as comfortable as it possibly could be. Blankets, pillows, snacks, a drink, the remote is right there, right? All of these things, and he piles them up just right so that when he sits in his, because he's got his own chair, an own recliner that he can kick back in and do whatever he wants, and he will just go in chill mode. My kids, they're workers. It is one of the things that I am most proud about my kids is my kids will work and work and work. They do not, when we say, hey, we got to clean up the house. Hey, we got to go in the backyard. You got to go and clean up the dog poop in the backyard. Or we got a work day at church. You got to do this. Like, yes, Dad. Like, hey, they will go and they will work. I am extremely proud about the fact that when we tell them to do the dishes or do the laundry or to clean up their room, that they say yes and they don't argue with us. And we ask the kids to work and we get greeted with okay. But the one exception that my son will make when it comes to working is when he's in chill mode. When he is comfortable, he has worked really hard to get that perfectly. When he's in full chill mode, when he has burned himself into his chair and he has a bowl full of snacks and a fresh, cold drink, if you ask him to help, he'll push back. He gives out a little wine, or he asks, hey, can I have a few more minutes before I start doing this? Right? When it's time to get comfortable, only the bathroom or more snacks can get him up. And usually the snacks part, all he has to do is work his mom a little bit, and she will go get snacks for him. And reality is, if you gave him an empty bottle, he wouldn't have to get up to go to the bathroom either. But that's too far. But that's how a lot of us are in our spiritual life. Like we have worked very hard to get where we are today. We have broken generational family curses. We have broken addictions. We have broken strangleholds on our life. We have worked hard to set the example for our family, and we've really gone through a lot of things. We've worked hard to get there, and once we get there, and once we've gotten past those things, we look around and we get comfortable. And we look around and you know that old song, I Shall Not Be Moved? We take that literally. I'm here, I'm not moving. You cannot move me from this spot because I am comfortable on the cusp of entering the promised land. These tribes, these 2.5 tribes, because Manasseh, this split the tribe of Manasseh. Half stayed and half went on. When these tribes, they look around and think, you know what? This is good enough. This is almost the promised land. We can be comfortable here. We can make a life here. This can be good enough. They've forgotten. These people have forgotten what the chains were like in Egypt. They have forgotten all the miracles and the provisions. The place that they are at right now, this place that they are at right now, it is so much better than the desert that it feels like it's a good place to stop. And they stop short of everything that God has promised them. Now, I do want to make something clear here, right? I don't want to make a little side note here. The Israelites, when they stopped here, they're not being outright disobedient. They go to Moses and they ask Moses, hey, this is what we want to do. And after his initial anger, Moses agrees, okay, if you want to stop here, then you can stop here. He gives them the okay as long as these tribes send their fighting men into the promised land to help the rest of the tribes clear out the promised land. He said, hey, if you'll send your troops, if you'll send your warriors if you'll send them to fight, then you can stay here, right? So, in these two and a half tribes, they held up their end of the bargain. They said, okay, we want to stay here, but we're going to send our fighting men with you. They did that. And you're like, well, okay, Pastor, I'm confused. Like, if they asked for permission and Moses granted it, and they kept up their end of the deal, why are we talking about their almost? Why are they getting singled out? And it's a fair question. And it's a good question, and I have an answer for you. So let's get into it. Number one, comfort. First thing that we learn from this is that comfort can replace calling. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh look around at the land east of the Jordan and decide, this is good enough. And that is the entire tension of this morning. The land was not sinful. The land was not cursed. It was not evil. In fact, Numbers 32 said that it was very good. The land was very good. It was suitable for livestock. They had livestock. The land was good for livestock, which means that the decision on the surface looks practical and reasonable. The problem is, the tension here is while the land looked good and while the land was suitable for what they wanted it, the problem is that wasn't what God had for them. He had something more for them, something better for them. And a favorite tactic of the devil is to get us to start thinking, this is fine. This will work. This is almost there. This is good enough. Good enough obedience. Good enough prayer life. Good enough commitment. And eventually what happens with good enough thinking is eventually we stop pursuing the fullness of what God has for us because we find a place that feels comfortable enough to stay. It used to be way worse than this, and now I'm here, and this is comfortable. Like I could live in this spot right here, and we stay there. But meanwhile, God says, I got more for you. I've got something else for you. The promised land, what I'm leading you into, is just keep going. Just keep going a little bit further. These tribes are standing on the edge of promise. Something greater is one more river crossing away. They have endured hundreds of years of slavery. They have endured 40 years in the wilderness. They have endured chains and whips and beatings and all of these things. They've crossed the Red Sea. They just got one more river crossing to go. And they're like, you know what? This is good enough. I'm almost there. They had fought and endured for years, but when life became manageable, comfort took over. And that's easy for us to fall into, right? Remember like the times when you thought your marriage was over and falling apart? Remember how you prayed back then? Remember how you prayed? Remember how you trusted God when you got the bad diagnosis from the doctor? Remember how you're like, all right, God, I know what this is, but I'm going to trust you. Remember how you came to church when you thought you were in financial ruin? Remember those times when we didn't know what else to do, so we hit our knees and we just gave it all to God and we trusted Him and we prayed and we were committed? Remember those times? I've been in those situations. Remember how you prayed for a kid that was away from the Lord? Remember how you trusted Him during that time? And then what happens? Our marriage gets better. We get a raise at work. Our prodigal child comes home, right? The treatment works, right? You're healed. Your body is fine. Life gets better. All the things that you have been just pouring out your heart and your soul to God and trusting Him with everything that you got, God answers our prayers. And then what happens? We get comfortable. Because we're not on our knees the way that we used to be, and we stop growing. We stay right where we stop pressing like we did before. We stop pursuing because we caught what we were after. I remember years ago, when we were still living in Kansas. I was on my way to go hunt one morning, and I already killed a buck that year, and I was just going to go and see if I could kill a doe. And as I'm driving, I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and I see the sun is coming up behind me. And I'm like, I've got 15, 20 more minutes before I even get to my hunting spot. Plus, I got another 20 minutes to get out of the truck and get to my spot. At least 30 to 40 minutes before I'm ready to hunt. And the sun is already coming up. And I'm like, you know what? I never would have done this 2 weeks ago. What changed that from the 2 weeks ago till today? I caught what I was pursuing, and so I was no longer pursuing with the same energy, the alarm went off, and I'm like, let me just hit the snooze a time or two. When you're chasing the buck, you'll never hit the alarm or the snooze. But when you get your goal, and the same thing with God, when we are praying, and God, please, I need your help, I need your answer, please, my marriage is falling apart, my kids are going to hell, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills this month. We pursue God with an intensity and a passion because we are in desperate need of it. And then when He answers it, we're like, God, I'm not saying we're not grateful. I'm not saying we don't appreciate it. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying human nature is once we've achieved our goal, just kind of take our foot off the pedal a little bit. We pray like crazy when life is cracking, but our dependence levels drop as our life stabilizes. The danger of spiritual comfort is this. It convinces you that because nothing is wrong, nothing needs to grow or change. But following God has never been about staying comfortable. From the very beginning, God has consistently called people out of comfortable places. He called Abraham out of his homeland. He called Peter out of the boat. He called his disciples to leave the nets and careers and routines and the security behind to follow him. Jesus never once looked at his disciples and said, you know what, guys? My primary goal for you guys is to be comfortable. I just want you to have just enough of me to be comfortable. No, he says things like, take up your cross, deny yourself. Comfort becomes dangerous because it slowly lowers our spiritual urgency. We no longer chase after God like we did during the crisis. These tribes, their ancestors for generations have been crying out to God in desperation. God, hear our cries. Free us from slavery. Free us from our oppressors. God, we can't keep going through this. God answers their prayer. They get through that. They get through the desert. They get to a spot. It's like, man, this is so much better than what it was before. This is good enough. This will work. We're almost there. We're quiet. And God says, you can stay if you want, but this is not what I have for you. We no longer chase after God like we did during the crisis. And it's not because we stopped loving God. We just got comfortable. These tribes had spent generations longing for the promised land, and now they're standing there saying, close enough. And that is heartbreaking because comfort rarely feels wrong in the moment, which is why so many people settle in comfort. Comfort whispers, you've done enough, you've grown enough, you're spiritual enough. Meanwhile, God is still calling you forward into deeper faith, deeper surrender, deeper obedience. Because hear me, there is always more of God to pursue. The greatest threat to our calling may not be failure, right? It may not be failure. It may be a good enough mindset. There are things in life that good enough works. You're trying to fold a fitted sheet? Good enough. Or if you're like me, it's not going to be good enough because my wife won't like that, so I'm just going to leave it here. She can deal with it. It'll be good enough. There's things that are good enough. Like sometimes you ever pull into a parking spot and you're not quite in the center. Good enough. It's fine. Right? Or you get done, you're mowing your grass and you get done and you're sick of mowing and you hate mowing because mowing is stupid and you still have to do it every week because your neighbors will get mad at you. Sorry, I'm working through some things. Anyway. But you get done mowing and you realize that there's one little spot in the corner that you miss. Good enough. Right? There's things in life that good enough is okay. One of the things in life that is never, ever going to be good enough is our spiritual life because there's always more of God to pursue. Keep pursuing, never settle, don't stop short. Which brings us into the second point this morning. When we settle, we stop growing. Moses immediately becomes concerned when these tribes want to stop because he understands when people stop moving forward, stagnation begins. In the early history of Israel, these tribes, Reuben and Gad and Manasseh, they have a pretty significant role in these things. We don't read a lot about them, but we know that they are known for their warriors. They have a very strong military force. They're a fairly big, significant part in the early history of Israel post-Egypt. But at this moment, when they stop short, as the rest of the Old Testament unfolds, these tribes become less and less and less known. As far as I can tell from the research that I did last week, these tribes, they don't produce any warriors of note after this. They don't produce any prophets. Through the line of Manasseh, we get the judge Gideon, and through either Manasseh or Gad, we get the judge Jephthah. But other than that, we don't see anything else positive about these tribes. They sort of fade into oblivion. In Judges chapter 5, Deborah, the judge Deborah, she writes a song. She wins a huge victory. And she writes a song. And in that song, she mocks Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh for not showing up to the fight. Like literally, hear me. A woman in the Old Testament making fun of your cowardice, that hurt. Like that was a big thing for a woman to mock you. And so she's literally writing songs. Who used to be a strong military force is now like too scared or too busy to even go to battle. That she's writing songs mocking you, right? This is a problem. This is because as they settled there, as they stopped short, the stagnation begins to amplify. What started out as a group of noble, strong, fierce warriors has now become a punchline in a song. Comfort in stopping short led to stunted growth, and these tribes, they just sort of exist in their own world. They're not doing necessarily anything wrong up until this point, but they're just not doing anything good either. They just go to fade into oblivion. And the beginning of that was when good enough entered their actions. Because hear me, there is no neutral in the Christian life. You're either growing or you are drifting. These tribes were willing to stop because the current situation that they were in felt manageable. It felt good enough. It felt close enough. But good enough faith doesn't produce mature faith. Peter never walked on water while staying comfortable in the boat. Abraham had to leave what was familiar before he experienced the full promises of God. David had to walk into a valley that had a giant in it while everyone else stood frozen in fear. Because good growth always requires movement. Complacency is dangerous because complacent Christians think that they are on the right path. They think, hey, I'm good, like I'm doing the right things because, like, you know what, I still attend church sometimes, right? I'm still there occasionally, right? I still know the Bible stories. I still post little memes on social media that says God is good or whatever. Like, I still have like 15 Bibles in my closet. So like I'm doing good enough, right? But inwardly, they've lost some of their hunger and their desperation and their pursuit or their dependence on who God is. When complacency creeps in, we begin to treat our spiritual growth like we do our gym membership. We carry that card in our wallet. We keep the little thing on our key ring. We have it in our car, but we rarely dust it off and actually go inside. Growth requires pursuit. You do not grow closer to God accidentally. I never want to look back in my life. I never want to get to a point, retirement age, or as I get even older, whatever, and look back and think, I wonder what would have happened if I would have stopped short, if I would not have stopped short there. I wonder what would have happened if I would have kept pursuing and kept trying to grow like I did at the beginning. I wonder what would have happened if I wouldn't have gotten complacent with good enough. I never want that to happen for me or for you or for us. One of my biggest nightmares is the idea of 20 years from now. So there's going to be a conversation in town and be like, you know what? Remember back in the day, there used to be that church over by the park? Whatever happened to them? That is, I don't want that to, and that can, it's like, well, that's ridiculous and that's crazy. No, it's not. When we get comfortable and complacent with where we are, we will become stagnant, and eventually we will fall away, and we will not have an impact anymore. It's absolutely possible if we ever have the mindset of good enough. And I'm not just talking about as a church, like, oh, we got to keep, I'm talking about each one of us as individuals thinking, you know what, this is good enough. I've grown enough in my faith. No. Don't almost get there. Keep pursuing God because there's always more of Him to pursue. God has more for each one of us as long as we don't stop at almost there. And hear me and understand my heart. I'm not stomping your toes this morning. I'm trying to give you encouragement that God has more for you than you could ever possibly imagine. Keep pursuing Him. Don't stop where you are because He's got so much more for you. And finally, number 3, settling short always costs more than we think. Remember asking the question at the beginning, if Moses gave the okay, man, they held up their end of the bargain. Why is this whole story a bad thing? The lands were good, the livestock would thrive, Moses was cool. Where's the problem at? Well, here's the problem. Because what seemed like a good idea in the moment had terrible ramifications later. Not only did it stunt their growth, right? They didn't produce prophets. They didn't produce any more warriors. They really didn't have anything to do with the rest of Israel's history. It also led to their eventual downfall. Hear me. God will never push us further than we want to go. If we say, I am firmly planted here and I'm not moving and I'm done, if we decide this is good enough, if we decide I've crossed one river, but I'm not crossing another one, we can stop. These tribes did, but in doing so, they isolated themselves from the rest of Israel, from the place where the tabernacle would be. And we've already seen that they quit, like I said, quit producing warriors and prophets and all those things. But what we read in 1 Chronicles chapter 5 is the final unforeseen consequence to stopping short. So 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 23. The people of the half-tribe of Manasseh were numerous. They settled in the land from Bashan to Baal Hermon. That is to some other place that I can't pronounce. These were the heads of their families. A bunch of guys I can't pronounce because I'm redneck from south of Missouri. They were brave warriors, famous men, and heads of their families. Verse 25. But, there's a lot of places in the Bible where buts are a good thing. This is not a good thing. But, they were famous warriors, famous men, brave warriors, heads of their families. But, they were unfaithful to the God of their ancestors and prostituted themselves to the gods of the peoples of the land, whom God had destroyed before them. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, who took the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh into exile. He took them to Halah, Habar, Hara, and the river of Gozan, where they are to this day. Walking to the promised land. Almost there. They said, you know what, we're done here. We're good, and this is good enough. They isolated. The rest of Israel kept going. The tabernacle where God was going to be at kept going. The security of everybody around them, the other tribes, they kept going. They isolate themselves over here while everybody else kept going. And eventually, because of their proximity of where they were at, all of the foreign kingdoms, all the foreign cities and the foreign gods began to pollute them and to get into their life, into their everyday life. And eventually, these tribes are the first tribes to fall because they did not get to where God wanted them to go. They stopped short, and as a result, the influence of all around them gets them, and then the first tribes to get taken into exile. Their story is eerily similar to Abraham and Lot. Remember Abraham and Lot where... like when they're going into the area and Abraham says, hey, which spot do you want? And Lot says, I'm going to take this spot, and this spot was the best. It was good for livestock. It was the best spot. But what? It was close to Sodom. And so Lot stops short. Abraham keeps going. Lot becomes vulnerable to attack. And he gets attacked and taken captive, and Abraham has to go and save him. And then the next thing that we read, he's away from Abraham's influence, and as a result, he was supposed to be in this area, and then we pick up the story a little bit later, and he's living in Sodom because the pull of Sodom was too strong. This is what happens to these tribes. God says, keep going. They're like, you know, I'm good here. I'm good enough. This is good enough. And the pull of everything around them was too much, and they fall completely apart, and they start worshiping false gods, and they're the first ones to go into exile. What seemed harmless in the moment eventually had terrible consequences because settling short always costs us more than we think. Short-term comfort often produces long-term loss. When we separate ourselves from God's plan, when we separate ourselves from the people who are going in the same place as we are, and that's so important. Surround yourself like, hey, this is where I'm going to get to. Surrounding yourself with people like, hey, I want to get there too. Have them around. And when you separate yourself from them and you put people who are not going to the same place, that influence is strong on you. When we isolate ourselves away from the center of God's presence, we become more vulnerable to the enemy's attack. Good enough is often the enemy of God's best. God wants more for you, more for me, more for us than we could ever possibly fathom. But the thing that will kill that most is settling for almost. Keep pressing into God. Keep changing the things keep chasing the things that He has called you to. Don't stop until you have reached the promised land. The tragedy of Numbers 32 is not rebellion. It's the settling. And honestly, that's what makes this message so personal to us. I would guess that most people who over their lives, if you were to look back, if you were to ask people who used to go to church or have turned their back on God at some point, I guarantee you a majority of them, a big number of them would say, you know what, it wasn't that I didn't plan to leave God. I didn't turn my back completely on God. I didn't have a fail. God didn't fail me. I'm just like, I'm done. Yes, there's some places that people might feel that way. But I guarantee you, a big number of them, they just slowly became satisfied with shallow faith, with good enough faith. And eventually that good enough mentality led them to a place where they no longer had that relationship with God. They became satisfied with routine Christianity, satisfied with knowing about God while no longer desperately pursuing Him. And eventually, they become spiritually stuck. Not because God stopped calling them forward, but because comfort convinced them to stop walking, to stay where they were at. Worship team, if you guys want to come up. Today, the Holy Spirit is whispering the same thing to us that he was to Israel. Do not settle here. Do not settle for casual Christianity. Do not settle for partial obedience. Do not settle for comfortable faith, because there is more. More growth, more surrender, more joy, more purpose, more faith. But you cannot experience the fullness of God while refusing to move forward with him. And yes, the movement may be uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to forgive. It's uncomfortable to surrender control. But every major moment of growth in Scripture that happened when somebody trusted God enough to move. Noah trusted God enough to build the ark. Abraham left home. Moses confronted Pharaoh. David walked into that valley with a giant in it. Peter stepped out of the boat. These moments required these men to step out of what their comfort zone and to move into uncomfortable situations because God was calling them forward. Will you stand with me? Nobody accidentally stumbles into deep faith, and neither will we. Don't ever settle. God has bigger plans for you. He has something better for you. But we will never get there with almost obedient, almost changed, almost surrendered. We're almost there. The promised land is always on the other side of movement. And maybe today God is calling you to move again, to move out of complacency, to move out of comfort, to move back into prayer, move back into surrender, move back into dependence, move back into a hunger for God. I get it. I understand it. After Maddox was born, and we were going through everything, you guys can start to play if you want. After Maddox was born, there was a period of time there that I had prayers, and I prayed in ways that I didn't know I had. Right? Because you're so overcome and desperate in the moment that you just spend hours on your face just praying. But then as time goes by, life gets a little bit better. God answers a prayer or two here and there. And the human nature is to kind of take our foot off the pedal. We've all been there. And God says, I don't want you, when you were in those moments, when you were desperately hungry for me, look what I did for you. Look how I showed up for you. Look how I answered your prayers. Don't stop there. Keep going, because I've got something more for you. Just because life seems manageable right now. And if life is manageable for you, I'm so happy for you. If you got money in the bank, bills are paid, you and your wife you and your spouse are great, your kids are great, life is good, your jobs are comfortable. Listen, I'm so happy for you. Truly, truly. I know that life seems manageable, but at some point, there will be a diagnosis, there will be a layoff, there will be a crisis. And if we are not desperately continuing to pursue God, if we're not careful, stopping it almost there can lead to major consequences later. Never settle for what you have right now. God has more for you. He has better for you. The promised land, I get it. You got to cross another river. Pastor, I'm tired. I just spent all this time walking in the desert. I'm tired. We just went through the Red Sea. I'm tired. I know. We got one more river to cross and you're in the promised land. Keep pressing into it. Keep pursuing. Don't settle. Just because you caught, I never would have dreamed I had a spouse and kids and a job and a house. I never thought that was for me. I never thought I'd get there. You should know my family. I'm comfortable. Life is great. Awesome. Truly. But keep pursuing God the same way that you did when you were trying to break those cycles and break those addictions and to break those family curses. Keep pursuing him that way now that life is good, and see where he won't do in your life. See what he has next for you, because he has more for each and every single one of us.